Hello, and welcome to our workshop today, Race and Racism Going to the Core. I'm Bridget Sampson, and I'm the CEO of Sampson Coaching and Consulting. I'm also an emeritus professor of communication studies at California State University, Northridge. We are so honored to welcome our guest speaker today, who will be presenting this workshop and taking questions at the end. Laurennnile. So let me take a couple of minutes to introduce you to Lauren so we will understand why we're all so very lucky to be here for this experience. Lauren is a trainer, a keynote speaker, an organizational development expert, and a retired attorney. She has over 30 years of experience designing and delivering training programs on a very wide variety of subjects. I've worked with Lauren many times. We've co-facilitated programs together. I've seen her speak in many settings, and the depth and breadth of her knowledge is amazing to me. She has worked with government agencies, nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, small businesses, Fortune 500 companies, and more over her 30-plus year career as a speaker and a trainer. Lauren covers leadership, workplace etiquette, diversity, and as I said, much more. At the request of the U.S. Information Agency, Lauren traveled to Jordan and Gaza to speak to members of the press, university groups, and Palestinian women's groups about issues of culture and gender diversity in the American workplace. At the request of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of International Information Programs, Lauren delivered keynote addresses on workplace diversity in Rio de Janeiro, Salvador, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. She's conducted equal employment opportunity programs and sexual harassment training for members of the White House staff. Lauren has been interviewed on radio and television, so look for her there. Of all the work that Lauren has done and spoken on and provided training on, her greatest passion, and I share this with her, is understanding the oneness of all humanity. Lauren holds her BA degree in philosophy from the University of New Orleans. She has her master's degree in philosophy from the University of Connecticut, and she holds her Doctor of Jurisprudence degree from Cornell University School of Law. Lauren is the author of the book Race, My Story, and Humanity's Bottom Line. All I can say is you must read this book. It is one of the most profoundly eye-opening, meaningful, informative, and emotionally just deep experiences you could possibly have with a book. I learned so much from it. I read it over and over. It's one of my most treasured possessions. And knowing Lauren personally as the author is very just so special to me. It's an incredible work, and I really encourage you to read it. You can get it on Amazon. You can find it on Lauren's website, which I also encourage you to check out, laurennnile.com, where you can find her podcast, videos of her, and glowing, raving testimonials about all of her programs. On a personal note, I just want to say that Lauren and I have worked together many times, but I consider her a friend as well as a colleague. When she would come to my class, we would go out to dinner afterwards and just talk endlessly about life and race and social justice and spirituality and everything under the sun, because Lauren is just, as I've said, this wealth of knowledge, and she's fascinated by everything. And I could never learn enough from Lauren. And when it's safe in the world again to get together, I so look forward to meeting in person again, Lauren, and continuing to connect with you in those ways. So I could go on and on for much more time, but I am ready to turn it over, and so ready to learn from and open my mind and my heart and learn from Lauren, because she has so much to share with us today. Thank you for being here, Lauren, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. That was an amazing introduction, and one that I will try my best to live up to. So thank you for all your kind words and taking the time to put all of that in your introduction, very little of which you actually needed. So I do appreciate it, and I thank you, Bridget.
My pleasure and my honor.
Thanks, Bridget. And welcome, everyone. I'm going to, put my watch in a place where I can definitely keep track of time, because I do want to have time for questions and answers after the presentation. So I do want to welcome everyone to the session. Thank you for coming. I know all of us have a lot on our calendars these days, mostly by Zoom, but special thanks because sitting in front of the computer is how we are interacting these days. So for being willing to sit in front of your computer for yet another hour, I thank you very much. So I'm going to get right into the presentation so that we can get through it as expeditiously as possible and then have your questions and answers afterwards. The title of this workshop, of course, is called On Race and Racism, Going to the Core. It's one that I developed probably 20 years ago, I'm going to say. But what you're getting is, as is indicated on the screen, a thumbnail sketch of the course, because this is really a 2.5-day course. And I'm going to sort of just give you an indication of what it would be like if you were in the real course. So with that said, I'm going to go right into slide 1. The objectives of the course are to increase understanding of the fundamentals of the human phenomenon referred to as race. What is it that we mean when we use the word race? Do we even know what we're talking about when we use the word race? To heighten our understanding of what it is that's at the very core of racism. What is it that is the foundation, the most fundamental aspect of racism? What's the rock bottom, the core of racism? We want to get there by not only experiencing the presentation, but also by respectfully and deeply listening to the thoughts and feelings of others in the room, if we were really in a room, and in that process, hopefully loosening both the mental and the emotional chains of unconscious bias that may be present in us. So those are the objectives of the course that I share with participants when we're actually going through the 2.5-day experience. So the agenda for this course is comprised of 13 questions, and we're going to go through, all 13 of them, but very, very quickly. Okay, so this is 2.5 days down to 30 minutes or so. All right, so question 1, what is racism? And so what I do is I have the participants in a large group brainstorm definitions of racism. Personal racism, institutional or systemic or structural racism. And as I say, that takes place in the form of a large group brainstorm. But I let them know that our focus for the purpose of this workshop is on personal racism. The institutional, the systemic racism is the stuff of another workshop. Our focus is on personal racism. And our focus within the subject of personal racism will be specifically on what is most often the cause of personal racism. And that cause, more often than not, is unconscious racial bias. So this is what we know about unconscious racial bias. And believe me, you're seeing just a few slides for every question. And so I have much more on unconscious bias and on every other topic that we'll discuss today. But very quickly, what we know about unconscious bias is that it is really unconscious associations or unconscious couplings, as some psychologists refer to them. In other words, we associate characteristics with people based on the color of their skin. So unconscious bias is really unconscious associations, the things that quickly occur to us on a very deep unconscious level when we experience someone who is different from us usually, or someone who's like us in terms of race or skin color. We talk about how, how it works, how bias in the brain works, and that our brains are actually hardwired to take shortcuts. So if we were looking at a table, our brains would automatically register table. If we're looking at a computer screen, our brains would automatically register computer screen. And that has served us well. Over the course of our life as a species, we've had to make very quick distinctions in order to save our lives. If this looks like a lion, I'm not gonna stand there and think, is this really a lion? No, I gotta get out of there. So mental shortcuts has been good for us, but where it has not worked is with regard to people. But our brain doesn't know that, so it takes the same shortcuts for people as it does for animals and inanimate objects. And that's where we get into trouble. That's the source of unconscious bias. So the impact of unconscious bias, what? For those of us who are targets, it robs us of our human individuality and thus of our very humanity. It's exceedingly painful, when you know that someone looks at you and sizes you up in all kinds of things, your taste of music, your intelligence, your level of education, how you grew up, all of that is encompassed in the color of your skin. It's very painful because they're not seeing you. They're not seeing you, the individual. They're not seeing you, the human being. On those of us who hold the unconscious bias, I put people in small groups in the workshop, have them discuss that. And then we report it out. And those results are often things like, wow, it robs us of the full measure of, for example, the kinds of friends we could have, the kinds of movies we see, the kinds of plays we see, the kinds of books we read. It really gives us a very narrow experience of this human life that we all have. Those are some of the kinds of reports that come out of those small groups. And then we have questions and final thoughts in response to that question: what is racism really? What is personal racism? But there's so much more to it, obviously, than we're going through today. But it is unconscious bias, unconscious couplings, unconscious associations that we make as soon as we see someone based on what they, how their physical appearance is. Question 2, how do we develop unconscious racial bias? I go into a little lecturette that I call childhood conditioning, in which I share with people that, as far as we know, none of us are born with any of this, but that as we grow up, a lack of information about different others, what we might call different others, combined with a lot of misinformation that we get from a variety of sources, the media and our parents and other kids, combined with a lack of exposure. Those three things, lack of information, misinformation, and lack of exposure, result in these unconscious associations. So we go through that little lecture, and then we have them do an early exercise. We have participants do an early exercise in which they go back and try to remember the first time either they themselves or someone that they knew was responded to as other than. And that's a very powerful experience for most people, very powerful, because it takes us back to early life experiences. And then I have the participants do an exercise called 5 repeats of the question, in which I sort of set them up to give me a ridiculous answer to a very simple question. But the purpose of the exercise is to show them that if I can set you up to give me an answer that's as ridiculous as the answer you just gave me in 5 seconds, what about a lifetime of conditioning? What would that do? What would be the impact of that? And then finally, I have them do an exercise called signatures, in which I have them write their name, sign their name on a piece of paper, once with their right hand, or I'm sorry, that's my bias, once with their dominant hand, and then once with their non-dominant hand. And I have them talk about the difference, how on the one hand it was comfortable and it felt natural, on the other hand, it didn't feel comfortable and natural. But then we talk about the fact that if I ask them to sign their name 10 times a day for 30 days, at the end of those 30 days, they'd be much more adept at it, much more comfortable. And that the same thing is true when we try to undo unconscious bias, when we try to unlearn unconscious bias. That at first it doesn't feel comfortable, it doesn't feel natural, but over time, if we continue, it will definitely be easier for us and well worth the effort for sure. Then final questions and answers on that second question, how do we develop personal racism? And then we go to our third question, what's the core of racism? What is it? Bottom line, what is at the very foundation of racism? So we go here, which is for many people, the most moving part of the workshop. I do a little reading from my book. There it is, Race, My Story and Humanity's Bottom Line. More than a book, it's an experience. And so I do a little reading on this topic from my book, followed by some slides. The core, the very root of racism is the unconscious belief that some people are more human than others. Specifically, it's the belief that Europeans and their descendants are literally more human. In other words, more highly evolved than, and are farther away from apes and chimpanzees and monkeys and all the other higher primates than are people of color, and particularly than people of African descent. That's the very root of racism. It's ugly and it's painful, and most people have a hard time going there. But in my experience, that really is unconsciously working for so many people. So the ugly, painful core of racism, our unconscious belief, here it is in pictures. Here it is. It's that human beings evolved up from Africans to Europeans. This, in my in my experience, based on comments I've heard over the years, certainly, and based on just my experience as a human being in the world, is the very root, the actual core of racism. Here it is, the evolution in our minds from the higher primate to African people, to Asian people, to sort of Semitic looking light brown people, to Europeans. That's it. Now, why do we believe this? Well, because we've received in many different ways over the course of our entire lifetime the message that people of European descent are the most human, the most highly evolved people on the planet. So here's that message that we've received so many times, just in pictures alone, just in pictures alone. Now, I only have 3 examples that follow because of our time, but in the workshop, I have example after example after example, many slides showing this. Here we are, showing the evolution of humanity from a higher primate into a person of European descent, a Caucasian person. This was Science Digest, the cover of Science Digest magazine, January, February of 1981. I still have the actual hardcover, the actual hard copy of this magazine. I'm a science nut. I love science. I've always loved science my entire life. And so I have a lot of science magazines, science for lay people, of course. And I still have all of these magazines. This one is in my garage. This image purports to illustrate how human beings have evolved thus far and how we may look one day in the future. The beginning and the direction of the implied evolution. There it is again, that familiar picture from an African person to an Asian person to a Caucasian person to a person who, according to the article, represents the way human beings may look in the future. And they're even in ascending order. I mean, literally ascending, going from the lower to the higher position, from African to European and then beyond. Different picture, same message. Once again, there's an evolution up from African to European. And we've seen this so many times over the course of our lives. And this is just that message in pictures, not to mention all the other ways in which we've gotten that message. Now, I give people a minute to just breathe after I show all of those slides. I must have 15 or 20 of them at least, because oftentimes people tell me that they found that particular part of the workshop extremely painful. So I give people a moment to just catch their breath, breathe. If they need a break, I give them a 5-minute stretch break, because it is exceedingly painful for everyone, and especially for people of African descent. And then I give them a chance to journal, write what it is you are feeling. We do a 2 or 3 minute meditation, followed by a round robin sharing. Depending upon the size of the workshop, if it's small enough, I ask that we go around round robin fashion and everyone take just a minute to talk about how they experienced that part of the workshop and that message that was so clearly portrayed in those pictures. Then, of course, final thoughts and questions, as we do before we end with each question. We go on to question 4. Well, what is race? When we talk about race, what is it really? When we think of race, what do we think of primarily? What physical characteristic? And of course, for most people, that characteristic is skin color. That's what we, more often than not, I believe, think of, among other things, when we think of race. We think of skin color. So what does science tell us about skin color? What do the scientists say? What's the truth about skin color? Again, I do a small reading from my book, and then I show some slides. The actual workshop slide presentation contains many more examples than the 3 that follow. I just have 3 for the purpose of this survey course this morning. So I start with this 1981, I still have the hard copy, 1981 issue of Newsweek magazine, The Search for Adam and Eve, Scientists Explore a Controversial Theory About Man's Origins. And this was the first time that I ever remember seeing a report on what's at that point was going on with regard to the new DNA science. It was brand new, and how the DNA science took us all the way back to the very foundation of the human tree in Africa. It was an incredible article, and it's still online. You can get it. The Search for Adam and Eve, Newsweek, January 19, I believe it was 81. So more recently, scientists are still finding more evidence of the African origin of our entire species. Here's one that I found particularly interesting. Scientists reveal the first European faces were not white. Much to the dismay of any would-be white supremacists, scientists have recently revealed that the face of the first Europeans were surprisingly sub-Saharan African in appearance. Very quickly, what happened is that human beings, for millions of years, after we made that evolutionary leap from chimpanzees, our closest relatives, to Homo sapiens, there were only African human beings on the planet. And then between 90 and 180,000 years ago, over then existing land bridges, fully formed modern day African human beings started walking across what were then land bridges to the entire rest of the planet, except Antarctica, of course. And over a course of 20,000 years, those Africans who left Africa and went to Europe and Asia and Australia and everywhere else on the planet, the Middle East, slowly physically adapted to their new environments. Can't go into a lot of detail about that. But at any rate, here's a person who was in the process of making that change. They call him Cheddar Man because he was found, his bones were found in Cheddar, England. And this is based on his DNA, the DNA that was found in his bones, a likeness that scientists came up with for what he probably looked like. So you can see his skin is still brown, his hair had begun to straighten out, his eyes had already, the color of his eyes had already changed. He still had more of an African nose than a typically European nose. So he was in the process of making that physical transition. And this link is to a video of scientists talking about this in England. His bones were found, just probably less than 2 years ago. Mounting scientific evidence of the Africa to Europe journey. And I should have said Africa to the rest of the world journey. It's just coming in more and more. The trek of fully formed modern day African men and women out of Africa to the four corners of the earth. There are many, many models of how this happened. Most of them are very, very close. They may differ to a slight degree or another. But for the most part, scientists have this path of human migration out of Africa to the rest of the world down pretty clearly. So these migration maps are all over the place. They are fascinating. National Geographic, I still have this one, here it is, March 12th, what was the year? I don't see it now, but I still have the original. It was a fascinating write-up of the greatest journey ever told, the trial of our DNA out of Africa to the rest of the planet. Thus, perhaps the most fundamental truths about race are that Africans are the parents of all of humanity. Africans are the parents of all of humanity, and that all people are equally human. All of us share 98% of our DNA with our closest relatives, chimpanzees. 98% of our DNA we share with them, and no race shares any more of their DNA with them than that. Time for questions and final thoughts. And boy, there are lots of questions about this in the actual workshop. But what I love is that you can check me in real time these days. You know, I'm so used to the to the skeptical looks about this information. But now with the internet, people can go on their phones and check me in real time. Don't believe me, I say to them, believe the scientists. Check it out for yourselves. So I give them a small group assignment at that point, and they love this. Participants love this part of the workshop, in which I ask them to create a work of art, a visual art, a song, a poem, a group performance, or whatever they'd like about the oneness of humanity. And my goodness, the people in the workshop come up with such wonderful, and sometimes very funny, skits and works of art, just beautiful representations of the oneness of our human species. I love this part of the workshop. It's so moving. And they perform, each group performs their piece of art for the entire class. Question 5, what are the fundamentals of the biology of race? We're one human family, period, full stop. One human family. That's why we're in this coronavirus nightmare with each other together. We're all contagious to each other. We have the same germs, the same injections. What are they called? We're looking for that thing that's going to, I'm rushing, so I can't think as clearly as I'd like right now. Vaccine, thank you. We're all looking for a vaccine that'll work equally on all of us because we're one human family, one biology. So here we go. Procreation between a horse and a donkey. As similar as they look, a horse and a donkey, as similar as they look, because they are not an exact genetic match. In other words, because they are members of two different species, when they procreate, they create a mule. A mule is an animal that is not biologically viable because it has no sex organs, and therefore it can't recreate itself. It can't procreate. And why is that? Because its parents are close enough to procreate, but not close enough. They're not the same species, so they're not close enough to create a perfectly viable offspring. But this young woman and this young man, as different as they look, are an exact genetic match because they are members of the same species. And thus, when procreating, they create a biologically viable, perfectly human being. As different as they look, they are members of the same species. Thus, race is simply the human body's amazing ability to adapt over a long period of time, excuse me, to climatic differences. Nothing more, nothing less. And what scientists know is that if we took, for example, every European person alive today and put them in Africa, and every African person alive today and put them in Europe, in 20,000 years, they would have exchanged physical appearances. It's a biological adaptation for our survival. Adapt or die, one of the most fundamental laws of nature. All animals adapt to their climate. So this primate, chimpanzee, and these two people, these two human beings all live in sub-Saharan Africa, and they need dark skin in order to protect them from the incredibly hot climate, the incredibly hot rays of the sun in sub-Saharan Africa. This primate and these two human beings are from the northern hemisphere. They don't need as much melanin in their skin to protect them. So they all, over a period of time, lost most of the melanin in their skin to allow their skin to be able to absorb as much vitamin D from the sun. And vitamin D, we know, is critical in embryonic development. Evolution versus adaptation. This was our giant leap, our evolution. But this is the picture that we're never shown. We saw earlier the pictures that are always shown, ape to European. This was not a leap. This was not evolution at the bottom. It was a climatic adaptation. The picture that is always shown, and there are so many of these pictures. This is only 3 that I happen to put on one slide. Different, the same. The evolutionary process, by the way, is irreversible. We can never go back. Thank goodness. But any of the people, any of the human beings at the bottom of this slide can, over time, over 20,000 years or so, change appearance based on the climate that their progeny might travel to. This is our beautiful human family. Question 6. Since Africans were the first human beings to have been on the earth and they've been on earth longer than other people, why haven't they accomplished as much as other people? Why haven't African Americans accomplished as much as other groups who came to the US? Okay, so considering the first question, I ask people first, what do you think? You know, what do you know about African history? What is it that people think about when they think of African history? I have them discuss that in a large group. What do I know about the accomplishments of Africa, you know, and their contributions to civilization? Do I know that they have any? If so, what are they? If I don't know, why don't I know this information? Same thing with regard to African Americans. What do I know about their achievements and their accomplishments and their contributions to the United States? What do I really know about their history? If I don't know anything, why not? So I go through some little known African history about all of these incredibly advanced African empires, ancient African empires. The Nok Empire, the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, the Oyo Empire. I take them through write-ups in National Geographic about all of the incredibly great African pharaohs, the great kings and queens of Africa. I take them through a whole lot more than I just showed you. And 99% of that information people had never, ever heard of before, had never been exposed to it. But what about African-American history? So let's consider that question. What's the first thing that many people think of when they think of African-American history? Yeah, slavery. But little known African-American history. And then I take them through all of these people that have, these African-American people that have contributed so much to African-American history. And we have time in the workshop to go through it all, and the inventions, the hundreds of inventions by African-Americans, along with, complete with their numbers, their patent numbers and the dates. And what comes to mind regarding our neighborhoods, our communities, and how we live? Usually this: when many people think of African-American neighborhoods, Black neighborhoods, this is what they think of. These are the images that come to mind. But I ask them, have you ever seen, or do we see representations often of middle-class African-American communities such as these? You know, I mean, on television now, especially in commercials, you know, we're seeing some improvement, but by and large, not. These are actually wealthy African-American communities, wealthy communities outside of Atlanta, outside of Washington, D.C. I mean, I just Googled wealthy African-American neighborhoods, and there they were. But it's not what we think of when we think of Black neighborhoods. Images of other Americans of color, Indigenous people, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans. In the actual workshop, I talk much more about those other three groups of people as well. So we go through some of those images in the workshop. I have people share their thoughts in pairs about what we've discussed in this particular question. We have time for final thoughts and questions, and then we move on to day 2, question 7. Okay, how did Africans who've been here for so long become slaves in the Western Hemisphere? What's the origin of the form of racism that's been practiced by Europeans? And so we're running out of time, so I'll just very quickly run through these slides. It began with a gross misunderstanding from the very beginning. Another quick reading from my book. How has it been taught in the past, this form of racism? There are a number of answers presented, among them through Eurocentrism. Here are a few examples. Eurocentrism, viewing the whole world through the eyes of Europeans. So here's a couple of examples. This is what the images in Egypt actually look like, and this is how they are often portrayed in magazines. And we see this time and time again. Life magazine, I still have my original Life magazine. How we came to America. Well, my ancestors didn't come to America as immigrants with a hope in their heart, looking for a better life for their children. My ancestors came here very differently, but how we, the we, encompasses everybody. It's just Eurocentric. And it's, you know, it's not that these people are being, the writers of these articles are being intentionally racist. It's just so unconscious, you know, that when they think about we, Americans, they think about European Americans. Here's another one, the way we were, our Ice Age heritage, you know, Newsweek magazine from 1986. Even our very view of the world. This is the Mercator map that most of us in my generation grew up with. And this is the actual map that the National Geographic Association developed probably 30 years ago. This is how the world actually looks. In this map, you can see that the equator is actually 2/3 of the way down the map. The equator cuts the earth in half. We all know that. So the majority of the African continent is actually in the northern hemisphere. Europe is much smaller, and Eurasia is much smaller in reality than it is portrayed in this map that we all grew up with. And we go on to talk about this in some length, but our very view of the world has been, if you will, Eurocentrized, to make up a word. Why do we think that this is the way the world is and not like this? After all, the world rotates on its axis, so it spends just as much time in this position as it does in this position. But yet this is how we're shown the world, with Europe on top, as opposed to like this. The world is, as I say, as much this way as it is the other way in terms of length of time. We talk about this in fishbowls. I won't describe what fishbowls are, but it's a way of really getting to the crux of the matter, having half the class sit and listen as the other half discusses it, and then we reverse. Question 9, how has this form of racism affected the group assumed to be inferior, the group assumed to be superior, the relationship between the two groups? We really get into discussions about that in small groups or in pairs, and then in the large group. We come back and we report out what was the basic theme of the discussion in the small groups. And then we go on to question 10. What are some of the most important historical milestones in our attempt to mature beyond racism? Okay, so no time to go through all of this, but we talk about what happened from 1492. Actually, we go back, yeah, from 1492. I'll just leave that up on the screen for another couple of seconds so you can see that for yourselves. And then we talk about what happened in 1865 when the 13th Amendment was passed and African Americans were freed from the institution of slavery. All of these things then happened from 1865 until 1964. We lost a whole century, almost 99 years. We lost almost an entire century when we were not only were we not working on racism, but we were engaged in incredibly, as a society, incredibly racist policies and practices. Then from 1964 to 1920, over the last 56 years, again, all of these things have happened, which have increased the impact of racism on the targets of racism. We have questions, and then we go into questions 11, 12, and 13. And I just have them here for you to see. Why do European Americans and Americans of color often have such divergent views about racism? Most often than not, in any poll, European Americans, more European Americans, significantly more European Americans will say racism isn't as much of a problem as it was in the past. It's really, it may impact people's lives here or there, sort of sporadically. People of color have a very different take, saying it is something that is constantly present in our lives. Why do we have such divergent views about racism? Question 12, where are we today in 2020 regarding racism in the United States? That's often a very, very lively discussion. And then question 13, the last question of the workshop, where do we go from here? Can we ultimately grow and mature beyond personal racism, structural racism? If so, how? If not, why not? That's the last question of the day. And then, I show them that this is our planet, our only home. We can't live anywhere else. This is where we are all from, planet Earth. It's everyone's home. We all breathe the same air. We're all contingent upon, or dependent rather, upon the same soil for our food, the same water supply for our water. We have time for final questions and answers. And that pretty much brings us to the end of that workshop. But I think, a couple more slides. All of that entire history has resulted in a very painful, totally false stereotype of African Americans and other Americans of color. But what are the three most painful stereotypes of African Americans specifically? Being thought of as intellectually inferior, and that we are so genetically, that we're not as smart as other people. That's very, very painful. That we're historically irrelevant, in part because we're so intellectually inferior. We haven't done anything historically. We have contributed nothing to the world and to the United States, nothing to show in terms of anything, inventions, science, mathematics, you name it. We have no contributions, no accomplishments. And thirdly, that we're socially deviant and that we are that way genetically, that it's in our very genes, that we're lazy, or in my hometown of New Orleans, we call it lazy, trifling, and shiftless, that we're lazy, morally bankrupt, and criminally inclined, and thus dangerous, leading to the kinds of murders that we see today. It's a whole other discussion. In my view, if you ask another person of color, they may have a very different opinion. But in my view, those are the three most painful stereotypes, specifically for African Americans. We, at the end of the day, have time for people to share learning highlights. What was a tremendously helpful learning highlight for them, for the most significant thing they learned during the day. We have appreciations in case they want to appreciate anyone in the room who shared something specifically and particularly meaningful for them. And then that takes us to the end. So, wow, that was the 13 questions of race and racism going to the core. I am going to stop screen sharing now. And thank you for, looking at and listening to all of that and seeing how much time we have left. I have 11:52. We have 12 minutes, at least until noon. And then for anyone who wants to stay afternoon, I'm happy to stay on and continue answering questions.
Lauren, you are amazing. Thank you so much. I learned so much from you yet again. And every time I hear you speak and have you share all that you know and all that you have experienced, I learned something new. So I can't thank you enough. Teresa, oh my gosh, I saw you. I saw you a little bit, Teresa. Teresa was so engaged in what you were saying, Lauren, and I'm not surprised because Teresa is just one of the most amazing people on the planet. So Teresa, tell us what you'd like to share. I think you're unmuted. Can we hear Teresa?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is great. I pulled over because I realized that's probably safer, and I'm in my car. That's why I'm not wearing a mask. But I heard a comedian say something once, and it's relevant to what's going on here. So I wanted to bring this up, and I wanted to thank you, Bridget, for inviting me, and thank the professor for. I've learned so much stuff. I was taking notes and taking snapshots so I can go home and research all this stuff. But a comedian once said that we have the theory of evolution. And the theory of evolution is that, we started out as primates or animals, and then we morphed into human beings. So the comedian said, so what happened to the other apes and monkeys that we still have today? Did they decide not to turn into humans?
Oh boy, I love that.
Okay, so even though that's funny, he's got a point. You see what I'm saying? Because unless I'm misunderstanding what evolution is, I'm thinking that evolution is that, a tadpole becomes a frog. So at one particular point, there's no tadpoles because they've all gone on to the next level. And that I laughed, but then I went, So I'm not saying, I'm a child of God and a Christian. So the evolution thing was taught to me in school. But yeah, that's a question. It's funny, but it's a question. If we have evolved from apes and chimps and all of that, then what the other ones that are still being born just decided, I don't want to go to the next level and be a human. I'll stay a monkey.
No, not at all.
And thank you for all the other stuff you said too about how we're looked at and everything. Because I think the thing is that real quickly is that people do things and they don't understand how harmful it is, because they haven't stopped to think about what the other person may think. We can solve all of this if before you make a move, you say, you know what, if I reach in this person's hair and take something out without even asking, can I touch them? Do you think they'll be upset by that? And not be surprised when you've picked something out of someone's hair and they've turned around and asked you not to do that. We have to learn about how the other person thinks. We've been brought up differently. And I know there's others, so I'm,
Well, thank you, Teresa. And you're right, that comedian raises a very good question. The answer is that we are all still evolving. All of us are still evolving. All the primates are still evolving. Human beings are still evolving. We are on different branches. Our branch broke off and became Homo sapiens. Their branch is still what their branch is. They're all still evolving. Evolution takes millions of years. And if we were alive in 5 million years, I can guarantee you that the chimps that are alive today would look very different. And as human beings in 5 or 10 million years, we would all look very different too. We're all still evolving. That's a very good question. Thanks for asking it. And that's the answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa. And thank you for being here, Teresa. I'm so happy to see you. Mwah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank
and then
Yes.
I also wanted to respond very quickly, Teresa, to what you were saying about thinking before we act or speak. Yes, I could not agree with you more. Trying to say to ourselves before we think or speak, how can I be the most compassionate in this moment? How can I be the most empathetic?
Right.
If we all took a minute to do that, a second to do that, much of the pain that people experience because someone has said or done something unconscious would not happen. So thank you for that.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. We are going to continue the conversation, but if you need to leave, I want to make sure to say this before people may need to leave in 2 minutes at the scheduled end time. Please go to Lauren's website, laurennnile.com. She has hours and hours of podcast episodes that you can click on right there. This overview was barely scratching the surface of what Lauren has to teach us. You can tell. I know that you could tell that. Please listen to her podcast. Please read her book. Please, if you are work with an organization that can bring in a speaker, as she talked about, this is normally a 2-day intensive workshop where you do personal, deep work and application of all of these concepts that she's talking about. Please, please, before you leave, make a commitment to look at Lauren's work in more depth, because this was just a brief introduction to it. Her personal story is like no other that I have ever heard. If we have time for you who can stay, we may be lucky enough to hear of Lauren's childhood experiences, which is one of the most profound that I've ever heard in my life of I won't even say, but the moment in time and history that she experienced and remembering before and after the Civil Rights Act was passed is a story that you do not want to leave this earth not having heard. So either stay on with us in case she shares it, find it, or certainly read it in her book, okay? Because it just gives me chills to even think about that story. So I want to say that before we wrap up. And I also, or before you have to leave, in case you have to leave at 12, but we are really hoping that all of you can stay, because we're 1 minute to our scheduled end time, but we are going over. I do want to say we have a free workshop every single month just to help in the world with everything that's happening. Next month, we are doing a meditation and mindfulness workshop. I hope you can make it. I'm going to share super quick, just on the screen. Can everybody see? This is the invitation. Our guest speaker is here on the call right now, John Parker, who is an amazing meditation and mindfulness teacher, world-renowned and Grammy award-winning artist. You do not want to miss that. So I just wanted to at least throw that out there before our scheduled end time, but I do want to continue to have this conversation. So, and Todd reminded me to say that. So Todd, if I forgot anything else, or anybody, if I forgot anything else, please let us know if you're not on our newsletter. We only send it out one day, the first of the month, and we try to provide as much free value in the world as we can. So please just reach out to me privately if you're not on our newsletter, so that you'll know about our free workshops and all our free services. We're trying to be of service in the world at this incredibly painful, difficult time in so many ways. So, Lauren, would you be so generous as to tell us your story? You know the story I'm speaking of from your, would you mind?
Sure, be happy.
Thank you so much.
Yes. In a nutshell, I was born in New Orleans in 1953, and that was 11 years before the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. And so as a child, and literally until I was in what is now called middle school, we called it junior high school in those days, in New Orleans as a child growing up, I had to sit, we call them the screens for some reason, I don't know why, but I had to sit behind the screens in the back of the bus, and I'll never forget, they said, these seats are reserved for our colored patrons only, and they were tin, and to make a long story short, however many seats there were in the front, we could only sit back there. We had to sit behind the screens. And, you know, when I wanted to go to Howard Johnson's to sample the 34 flavors of ice cream that I passed every day coming home from school, we couldn't go. Everything was white only. You know, whenever my mother took me to see a Disney movie, 101 Dalmatians and Mary Poppins and all of those movies that were out when I was a child, we had to sit in the colored section, way up in the balcony of the Circle Theater. I mean, everything was segregated in New Orleans. If you were sitting at a bench waiting for a public service bus, the bench that might have been 5 or 6 feet long had a colored side and a white side with a white stripe down the middle. Water fountains, colored and fountain. Everything was colored and white, colored and white. There was a familiar 3-restroom lineup, men, women, and color. It's the world I grew up in. It was American apartheid. Well, when President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of '64, on July 2nd, 1964, I'll never forget it. Never forget it, because the phone in my house that evening was ringing off the hook. All my parents' friends, my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, everybody was calling the house. Everybody was so happy and elated, and everybody was talking about it, and I couldn't believe it, and I was just not quite, I was 11, going to be 11 in a month. And I thought, what is everybody so happy about? And I asked my mother, Mom, what's going on? Why is everybody so happy? And she said to me, well, you know those 34 flavors of ice cream that you've been wanting to try at Howard Johnson's? I said, yeah. She said, well, this new law says that we can go there now. We can go to Howard Johnson's. and we can try any flavor of ice cream you want. I was like, wow. She said, and you know, sometimes when we're at the shopping center and we want to stop for lunch and we can't go to Morrison's cafeteria because it's white only. I said, yeah. She said, well, this new law says that we can sit down in Morrison's cafeteria now and we can have lunch. I said, whoa. And she said, and you know that big roller coaster you've been wanting to ride at Pontchartrain Beach? I said, yeah, with much anticipation, thinking, oh my gosh, don't tell me. She said, well, this new law says that we can go to Pontchartrain Beach now and we can ride that big roller coaster if you want. And I thought as a kid, wow, one law does all of that? I was amazed. I had never before in my life seen the adults so collectively so happy as I did that night that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. And then literally the next day, I saw people up on rooftops taking down white-only signs and painting over white and color on you know, round support beams of stores that had WHITE on one side of the column with a really nice, tall, silver metal fountain with frosty cold water coming out of it. And on the other side of the column, COLORED in big black block letters with a little tiny white porcelain fountain that had just a I don't know, a little bit, a sprinkle of hot water coming out. I saw all of that begin to go away immediately because when President Johnson signed the act, he made it effective immediately, not in 180 days like many acts. They give employers and businesses 6 months, 180 days to make the transition. No, President Johnson said, we've been doing this too long. This act takes effect immediately. And the next day I saw that change. It was an incredible, I had seen the adults in my life be collectively frightened during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I didn't know what was going on, but I could see all the adults in my life very frightened. I'd had no clue as a child about what nuclear war was. And being in New Orleans, which is so close to Cuba, I mean, we were really, on the front end, if you will. But I knew that all the adults were terribly frightened during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I didn't even know that was the name of it at the time. But I'd never seen the adults be so collectively elated as I did the night that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. So I think that's the story that Bridget wanted me to share with you, and it was a pleasure to do so.
Thank you, Lauren. And I hope that you felt a little piece, everyone, of the power of that story. And you've got to read the book to really understand how much more goes with that story and Lauren's whole experience in life. And I just do want to say that, after that, it wasn't all rainbows and daisies. You have stories of people being beaten up on buses for not being willing to sit on the back any longer now that it was law, and much turmoil and difficulty and continued racism in many ways. So, and I think I just want to say that everything you've taught us today, if anybody out there was feeling resistant, like, well, that's not me and I don't have that unconscious bias, I really challenge you to look deeper and to read Lauren's book and to really hear all of her stories and all of her lessons. Her book is, I meant to find it, it's big. And yet it just barely again scratches the surface of how much we all need to understand about the unconscious bias that lives in our brain, and waking up to it and stopping this denial. We all absolutely have had it ingrained in our brains to believe those horrific things about people of color that Lauren described earlier in the workshop. And if anybody's sitting there thinking, that's not me, I see everyone the same and I'm not racist, please work to wake up, because it's simply not true. I know what I'm saying is very controversial, but now is the time. There's no more time. Things have not gotten better. So this beautiful story that Lauren tells us, while it's so heartwarming, please don't for a moment allow us to move into complacency and think that things are better and there doesn't need to be a fight, because we need to fight more than ever. And I hope that's why you're all here, but it's our job to do the work of really looking deeply inside at the ugliness that lives in our own minds and hearts, rather than saying, oh, that's not me, I'm an ally, I'm not one of those people. Yes,
and
Lauren.
Bridget, if I may, let me just say that when engaging in that circumspection, if you will, I always say to people, there's no blame, shame, or judgment. We all receive those messages. You know, none of us were born this way. It's not our fault that we have this. I'm sure I carry so much unconscious bias about people with disabilities, you know, about people who perhaps speak English with an accent or something. You know, all of us have some kind of unconscious bias. It's not our fault. You know, I work every day. I try to work every day online. If I have a thought or I have a reaction to something I see on TV, I think, whoa, where'd that come from, Lauren? Wow, and you teach this stuff. You know, I think that when people feel guilty about it, it makes us want to stop. This doesn't feel comfortable. I don't want to do this diversity stuff. I don't want to look at myself and try to, no, it just feels too bad. I feel guilty, or I feel, you know, bad about it or ashamed. Right. No, don't let that guilt or that shame stop us. Because if we do, for example, if I as a person who lives right now without a disability, let myself do that, I don't want to look at that. It's uncomfortable and I'm ashamed of it. That's coming from able-bodied privilege. I have the privilege to say, I don't want to look at it. It's not fun. If I were a white person and I said, I don't want to look at my unconscious bias, that's coming from white privilege. I don't have the option of not dealing with those folks all day, you know, all the time, who act in that way. And I would ask that you not engage in what can be, at first at least, an uncomfortable journey, because I have to deal with those folks every day in my life. So, you know, no blame or shame. Don't feel bad about it. Just go, oh, I'm on automatic pilot again. Okay, let me rethink this. And just be gentle, but consistent with yourself, please.
Yes, I could not agree more, Lauren. You're absolutely right. And I think we just need to look at it, and it's part of what our brain does to simplify things and to make sense of the world. And exactly as you said, as we do all day long, we change and distort what we're seeing and what we're thinking about things to make sense and to be able to function in the world. And so if we can just look at it that way and detach from the guilt and the shame and look at it honestly, we can catch ourselves more and make the choices that our higher self, we believe, really wants to make. And so we did have a question that I think would be important for all of us to hear from you and anyone else who wants to share. So the question then is, how can we be allies? How can we all be allies to all people on the planet, but especially in the Black Lives Matter movement? And do you have any thoughts for us on that?
I do, actually. You know I do, Bridget.
I know.
First of all, well, in fact, I have something that I wrote out. I'd be glad to share it. I don't think I have it on my website, but I do have it on my listserv. I write, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 posts a week. So if anyone would like to be in my listserv, just email me at laurennnile@gmail.com. It's just my name, laurennnile@gmail.com. Ask me to put you on my listserv, and I'd be happy to, and then you'll get my posts. As I say, they come out maybe twice a week. But one of the things that I have in those posts is my list of 8 things that I want white people to do. And of course, since I don't have the list in front of me, I won't be able to think of all of them. But yes, there are definitely things that white people can do who want to be allies to people of color in this struggle for racial equality. One is, when you see something, say something, with regard to what I refer to as the daily indignities. Now, in the class that we just very quickly went through, we talk about the daily indignities at some length. But when you see, for example, that you're not next in line in a store, but you're being called on next, a line that might not be so straight. Yes, sir, can I help you? You know, say, you know, that woman was here first. You need to wait on her first. You know, when you see, for example, someone in my neighborhood said, I don't want to see those guys who do all the landscape work in our neighborhood. I don't want to see them sitting under the pergola by the pool eating their lunch. So what did our HOA president do? He bought a table and put it in the HOV lot, a table and some umbrellas. I would have loved for him to have said, you know what? Those guys work hard here. It's a crew of Hispanic men. Those guys work hard here. They have a half hour for lunch. They sit and they eat their lunch, and then they go back to work. Yeah, they can sit under the pergola at the pool and eat their lunch. They've been doing it for years. You know, I would have wanted him to stand up for those men instead of buying and he's a really nice guy. He's my next door neighbor. He's a really nice guy. But he didn't think in that moment to stand up for those men and say, no, not happening. They're going to sit right where they've been sitting and eat their lunch. That's how I want white people to respond. So yeah, when you see something, hear something, say something. Gosh, I want you in your workplaces, in your places of recreation, or if you have a place of worship, or if you don't see a diverse group of people, ask why not. It's one level of awareness to be aware of racial jokes and racist statements and comments, but it's another level of awareness to look around and see who's not at the table, to see the absence of diversity. So I'd like you to, in everywhere that you live, look around and see, why is this board of directors not more diverse? Why is this HOA association not more diverse? And then start working with a committee of people in your organization on becoming more diverse. So that's another thing. One of the other 8 things on my list is, for God's sake, stop killing us. My goodness, work on the unconscious bias that results in a person, whether it be a police officer or a vigilante, looking at an African American or other person of color and automatically having the association of, dangerous, a threat to my life, threat to my safety, bam, and then taking that person's life. When you've just asked them, for example, to get their wallet, and they're reaching in their car to get their wallet. For God's sake, stop that. There are other things on my list of 8, but I'll stop there to give more time for other questions, Bridget. But if anyone would like to have that list of 8, and you don't have to be on my listserv necessarily, just let me know, and I'll be happy to send that to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Lauren. And on our website, Lauren was kind enough to write a special blog post just for Sampson Communication Consulting on what white people should know and do, what she would like white people to know and do. And I believe it's aligned with the 8 recommendations that you just alluded to. So, and we also, yeah.
I'm sorry, Bridget, I forgot that I had given it to you. So it's on your website as well. Thank you for reminding me.
In that post is a link to a PDF that has the whole article exactly as you wrote it. So please go to our website to find that. Please go to Lauren's site and read everything and listen to everything she's got. Sade says, preach.
Thank you, Sade.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Do you want it, Sade? Did you want it?
Preach gets a snap.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm so happy to see you here, Sade. Thank you. And thank you for for that encouragement. We're doing what we can here. So much more needs to be done, clearly, and you're all part of it with us. So we thank you for that. We have a comment. Lopez, I think it's Yadira Lopez. Why Lopez? I totally agree with those landscapers. And so you struck a chord, I think, for all of us, because we need to open our eyes wider and look around what's happening in our neighborhoods, in our backyards, in our places of work, worship, communities, and we will see it. If we start to look, we will see it. Just as of course you see it, and you're aware of it, and we all need to be, though. We all need to open our eyes in this new way, and we will see it in front of us every single day. So thank you for that. And
yeah, I have a question. I have Black friends, and a few of them, especially one guy, I can't seem to get him out of his old mode, even though he's extremely intelligent and religious and very creative and just a great guy. He's very, very angry, and he just can't stop being angry about the whole thing. So, and we come to, I try to teach him meditation, et cetera, all different conversations that we have. I was wondering if you had any advice on how to help him, how I could help him. We're very good friends, and we're sort of like a team. But, I understand why, but I don't understand how I can help him to get out of it, or can I?
Thank you for that question, John. I have for years said that things such as meditation, and I'm a daily meditator myself, and even Western style talk therapy are good in getting us to the point of realizing, for example, the source of, oh, this is why I'm so angry. Oh, this is why I have never had a good relationship with my brother, or whatever it is. When we are contemplative in that way, or when we talk it out with a trained therapist in that way, we can get to the point of, aha, that's the source of it. But then once we get to that source, in my opinion, neither of those two, maybe meditation, I'm not sure, but certainly Western talk therapy, in my view, is often not very helpful in having us deal with the feelings. We have the source in mind, but then what do I do with all those feelings? And so I, years ago, learned about something called reevaluation counseling, RC, co-counseling is its nickname, in which people discharge their feelings. That's what they do. The whole session is about discharging. And sometimes you may not even know exactly what it is you're angry about in that moment. You just know that you're angry. And you don't have to know. What you do is you discharge those feelings. So the person who's counseling with you, and it's all peer counseling, that person says, okay, I want you to just hold me, or you can just, I'm going to stand against the wall, and you just push. You just push. And I want to hear a sound, just hear a sound. And that sound is often primal and guttural, and it is just pain coming out. And there are many ways to help a person discharge. And when you learn about this, you learn all the different ways of helping someone discharge. Scanning is another one. When was the first time you felt this? What would you like to say to this person? Okay, here's their face. What would you like to do? Punch it. Okay, let's get a pillow. Let's get a pillow. Let's do that. And over time, with that kind of discharge, depending upon the level of anger or whatever the person's feeling, it can take months and months and months. But eventually, with that kind of consistent discharge, after a while, the person will start coming to their weekly session going, I don't have very much on top today, because they will have discharged so much pain, so much hurt. And at that point, you can often see a physical change in the person in terms of bags under their eyes and all kinds of other things, because they have discharged over time so much pain. In my view, the only way to help a person who's stuck in that is to help them get it out. Get it out. Talking to them about it, meditating about it, perhaps. Certainly just talking with a therapist about it will not do it. That'll lead to, those kinds of things lead to ahas, realizations about the source of the anger, but then we got to get it out, because as long as that person's suffering that much, as long as they're angry that much, they're suffering in a way that they need not, if they could just get it out. But it's underneath, and it's just bubbling all the time. They just need to, and he may say, but it's not going to do any good. Racism is still going to be there. I'm not going to do that, because it's an exercise in futility, because the racists are still going to be racist. Yes, but you know what? You will feel better. It's hard to believe that when they're going into the process. How's that going to make me feel better? The next time somebody, profiles me in a store, they just got to trust the process. It will. You will feel better, because you've gotten so much of it out and externalized it to such a great degree. That's what I would recommend, John. I don't know if your friend would be willing to do that, but that's what I tell people all the time. Sometimes they just need to sob. I know when my mother died, when my father died, 12 years after my mother died, my older brother, he's 10 years older than me, my shoulder was soaking. He wanted to stop. I said, no, don't stop, Lamar, don't stop. Let it go, let it go. And he sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And I knew that he wasn't crying so much for my father, who had just died the week before, as he was for my mother, who had died 13 years before, but it had never come out. When my brother finally stopped crying, his lips were pink, he was ready to eat a sandwich. He hadn't eaten in days, because he had gotten it out. That's the healing process, I think. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I hope your friend engages in it with you. Trust, you've got to trust the person that he's engaging in this with, because you're so vulnerable during that process. And I hope that you have enough trust with him, John, so that he will do that with you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lauren. And that makes so much sense to me. Thank you. That the healing that is necessary goes so deep, and the things that we traditionally think of as our resources for being able to do that, something different is needed. So thank you for educating us. And it actually reminds me that I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to share for just a moment about your new book coming up, because as we mentioned in the beginning, and as you could hear from Lauren's answer, she's also deeply spiritual and connected to all that is divine, and has studied all the world's, spiritual traditions and practices, and we share a deep desire for everyone to see and feel how we are one, humanity is one, and we are all connected here in the physical world and in the spiritual world. And the book that she's writing is all about that. So would you be willing to just share with us a brief description of this book, which I so eagerly await reading?
Thank you, Bridget. Thanks for the opportunity. Sure. I'd love to. The current title, it has changed a couple of times. It was going to be Religion, My Story, Religion and Spirituality, My Story and Humanity's Bottom Line. My current book is called Race, My Story and Humanity's Bottom Line. This one was going to be Religion and Spirituality, My Story and Humanity's Bottom Line. And it indeed may be the title of the book before it's over. I'm toying with the title, Religion and Spirituality, It's Time We Mature. So I have to see what the actual title is going to be, but it's probably 70% written. So I'm hoping to have it finished by the end of the calendar year, I hope. But essentially, it is a book about the fact that all of us live in an incredible mystery every day. And that mystery is, where did reality come from? What is the source of this universe in which we all live? None of us know. On the one hand, look, we only have two possibilities. Either the universe was created or it wasn't. If it was created, then you got to say, if you're going to be intellectually consistent, well, who created it? Well, the creator, God, the creator. But then who created the creator? If it doesn't make sense for the universe to have always existed without ever having come into existence, then it makes no sense for a creator to have existed without ever having come into existence. Well, who created that? Well, a creator created that creator. Well, a greater creator. It doesn't make any sense at all. So to say that the universe was created logically makes no sense. The only other alternative to a rational mind is, well, the universe wasn't created. It just always has been. But that's equally as illogical. How can anything that presently exists never have come into existence? How can it always have just, eternally have existed? That doesn't make any sense either. But to a rational mind, those are the only two options. The universe either was created or it wasn't, equally as illogical. So we all live in this profound mystery every single day. And none of us know what the answer is, but we have different beliefs about it. And so this book is about the fact that, well, it's sort of like, can't we all just get along, regardless of our religious and spiritual differences? We all have beliefs about this profound mystery, but none of us really know. And it's time for us as a species to mature beyond all of the divisions and the distinctions that we have based on religion. More people are killed because of religion every day on this earth than anything else, And it is time that we look at, first of all, the total illogic, to make up a word, of, for example, anti-Semitism, how illogical it is to be prejudiced against somebody based on their faith. None of it makes any sense. And so what I do is I give a survey of the world's great religions and talk about what each of them believes. And then I say, now, this is what we've done with these differences. Man, the Crusades, the Inquisition, you name it. And then I talk about the reality, the necessity of us coming together beyond all of those differences and learning to work with each other based on either our faith in a divine creator, or either for atheists and agnostics, some of the best people I know are atheist or agnostic. They are highly, highly evolved people who are totally humanitarian, but they are atheist or agnostic. So we need to include everybody in this family of humanity, believers and non-believers alike.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that was just enough to whet everybody's appetite, mine for sure. And so we all need to run out and buy the book as soon as it's ready. And I will be sure to let our audience and our supporters and our community know.
Well, it certainly does talk about the difference between the East and the West, Eastern traditions such as Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism and Shintoism, and then the three Western religions of Christianity and Judaism and Islam. And man, I go into some discussions about the history there and what each can learn from each other.
Yes, I can't wait. Lauren, you are prolific. I love that your books are huge. And so,
500 pages.
So much to learn. Yes, we have a new.
I will, Bridget.
Amy, love you. Thank you.
I'm not gonna put my video on because I'm in my pajamas, so
Okay.
that just isn't gonna fly. I had no reason to get up today, except for you guys. So thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I'm very fortunate to be surrounded with a lot of like-minded people, and we've been social distancing, having political discussions, and having discussions around race relations lately. And I'm a proud mom of a 13-year-old, so I think it's really important that the discussion stays open. But I was shocked when my 24-year-old niece, who just graduated college, said she had never discussed in school anything about the Rodney King riots or the Watts riots. And my son, they never discussed the George Floyd, are we going to call it the George Floyd riots? But the issue with George Floyd and what happened. And it's shocking that it wasn't discussed. It was such a timely experience for him, and he saw what was going on, and not to have that communication with school. So what can we do to make this, so, you think, oh, it just keeps happening, it's never going to end if we're not educating people. And how can we continue to educate our youth on race relations if they're not doing it in the schools?
Well, in colleges, I think it's fair to say that most colleges these days have a Department of Ethnic and Women's Studies or something like that, which have all kinds of incredible courses on what's being called intersectionality, how all of the different facets of all of the isms, anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, classism, how they all intersect. I mean, there are lots of wonderful courses in Departments of Ethnic and Women's Studies, or whatever they are called at the particular university. So I'd like to think that those courses are available if they're chosen by the student. Now, some students say, I don't have a lot of time in my schedule. It would be something that, would be nice to take if I had time. So I personally think that every university in this country should have a freshman reading program, and maybe one semester, or if it's too much to ask for students, maybe a half semester, but at least I would say, hopefully, a full semester of intercultural studies, coming in the door. If you're going to be a student at this university, you got to do this first semester on intercultural studies. And I think that many universities actually have something like that. But I think that if every university enacted it, it would go a long way toward educating young people on the kinds of things that you're talking about, Jamie, that they might otherwise not get, because so many professors are uncomfortable talking about it. So many professors don't have a high level of comfort, personal comfort, talking about racial issues, talking about issues of gender and sexual orientation and sexual identity, and they think, I don't want to make any mistakes. I don't want to offend anybody. I'm probably going to say the wrong thing. So they don't go within 10 miles of it. But if they were to have their Ethnic and Women's Studies Department professors take that on, they would gladly take that on. But students, I think, have to be required to take such courses. Now, in high school, at the secondary school level, that's a whole other challenge. But hey, I once did a training in East Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where the school board was trying to require Confederate history. And if they can go to bat for that, they can go to bat for, a course such as the one you're describing, Jamie. It is so needed, because when I talk to adults in my workshops, the kind of things that I'm presenting to them, most had never heard of. And they're things that, if we just read the newspaper, if we just expose ourselves to, what's going on in the country at a certain level, we'd be aware of. So yes, I agree with you, Jamie. Secondary school, maybe starting in elementary school with regard to our unconscious bias and all that. We need that education desperately. Colleges can require it, and I think secondary schools can too, and they should. And so be an advocate for that. Write some kind of article for your local newspaper saying, this is what I'd like to see Cal State Northridge do. This is what I'd like to see. Try to get an online petition. Try to get that done, because students need it, and often will graduate after 4 years never having gotten it.
Yeah, I think Jamie, I'm with you. I'm with you, and it's a hard question. And I think a lot of us have to start locally and start with our own school. So Jamie, you're so educated, and you're an amazing speaker, and you're so passionate. Maybe you could start a program at Luca's school, and that could be a prototype for other schools. It has to start somewhere, and I think once some schools start doing it, other schools can learn from that model, and we can expand from there. That's typically how these things start. But unfortunately, it's not happening. I agree with you at the early level in schooling, and it's actually not happening in some universities unless they value diversity. As John, we'd love to.
Yeah, I just wanted to direct people to. I wrote down a YouTube called The Truth About the Confederacy, and it's incredible. Within an hour, you learn exactly what happened, how it was manipulated, everything about it. It's just an incredible thing. And then you just know what happened and why we're in the fix we're in. So, I just want to recommend that. It's on. I wrote it down over there.
It's called The Truth About the Confederacy on YouTube, John?
Yeah, it's on YouTube, and I put down the
Link.
website thing over here on the comments.
Okay. Oh, wonderful.
Just take those comments. Yeah, just go there, and it's just unbelievable. And like you say, it was everything. I had no idea how it was done and what was done, and then I knew everything all of a sudden. And it was a relief. It was really a relief to really know,
Mm-hmm. It's
anyway,
true. And your experience, John, is so common, that people don't know. After I've done a workshop, so often people have said to me, Lauren, why isn't this stuff taught in high school? I never knew about the Black codes, that right after slavery, the Black codes were enacted to try to put Black people right back into slavery. I never knew about the gains that African Americans made during Reconstruction, and including, having people be in the Senate and in the House. I never knew that there were Black people in the Congress in the 1870s, and and all those gains, how they were stripped away. I never knew any of that. Well, when you ask, well, how come, every other group has come here and I don't know, have been able to work their way from the slums to the suburbs in a generation. Why haven't those people been able to do it? You got a couple of days? I can tell you. But people don't know it. We don't know the real history. So I'm definitely going to look at that. Thank you, John.
It's great. You'll like it.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
But so I think, whoever needs to go, please go and take on the rest of the day. But I will say, as always, Lauren, I've sat, captivated hearing you speak in many, many hours of audiences, whether in my class or for the Educational Opportunity Program, when you used to come in and do the Walk of Life, which all of the students in the Educational Opportunity Program and mentors and faculty still talk about that experience and how profoundly moving and life-changing it was for them. So all of the hours I've spent, it's never enough. I always want more. And so I got so much out of today, and I can't even thank you enough. Thank you, Lauren. We'll talk soon. I look forward to your emails every week. I learned so much. Thank you for putting me on the list.
My pleasure. We'll be in touch soon.
Okay, take care, Lauren.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Brazil.
Bye. Bye.